Hello, boys and girls. You are watching Straight White Man. I know it's been some time since the somewhat preliminary launch of this channel. As some of you are aware, I was privileged enough to be stranded on the Gold Coast for about 2 months due to the COVID pandemic and travel restrictions. I am again super excited to be home and I'm getting myself primed to launch good and proper. Now, while I have a plethora of topical content in the pipeline, I've decided to start giving you my story. And not because I want to be known for my life story or to be a celebrity or anything like that, but because in later videos I'm probably going to be giving you my opinion from time to time. I'm very opinionated. So I thought it would be a good idea to show you where I'm coming from, historically, culturally, socially. I've had quite a few experiences that I think some of you will find interesting, but for now, I'd like to tell you about someone who was very dear to me. I'd like to tell you about my mum. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old. I was the youngest of three boys and still am. And our mum had custody of the three of us, or at least she did for a while. We were a fucking handful, okay? We were three hands full. My mum had to work full time to support us, and so she wasn't always there to look over us. We had a lot of time to run around and cause trouble. My two older brothers eventually, each in their turn, caused enough trouble to make our mum feel overwhelmed. As the oldest reached his early high school years, I think about 14 years old, he was sent to live with dad, and again, as my other brother reached his early high school years, he was also sent to live with dad. This was only about an hour away near the city, and we still spent every weekend together, as I would go to stay with my father every second weekend, and every other weekend my brothers would come to stay with me and mum. So both my brothers were caught being naughty and were sent to the gulag, and I stayed with mum because I never got caught. I'd like to say I was always close with my mum, but the truth is I was a terrible son. I treated her so poorly, but I was lucky to have her. She was a very, very kind woman, and everybody would say so. Well, my father, on the other hand, had a rather authoritarian parenting style. The only thing my mum really cared about was that we were happy and safe. If mum ever taught me anything, it was that being happy is the main thing. I remember on my 16th birthday, we were partying at a friend's house while his parents were away for the weekend. Somebody had called our house drunk, looking for the party, and my mum wised up. We were all sitting around the table on the back deck, drinking, smoking, when I heard her voice over my shoulder saying, "You're coming with me, mister." So she dragged me out of my own birthday party, but the next day, everything was normal. And I was a little bit confused as to why I wasn't being punished, like, at all. I think mum was watching TV when I came out the next day and asked, "Aren't you mad?" And to which she responded, "I'm just happy that you're okay." To be perfectly honest with you, I was pretty pissed that she wasn't mad. Like, if she wasn't mad, why did she have to drag me out of my own party? I'm pretty sure I could have lost my virginity that night too, to the 18-year-old hairdresser that I had a huge crush on at the time. Actually, somewhat ironically, I think she was the one who called my house looking for the party. So, anyway, mum was like an angel. Meanwhile, my brothers were thrown into a private school and forced into a regimented lifestyle of study, chores, and table manners. Some of that rigidity inevitably rubbed off on the three of us, and I'm pretty sure there's something in the psychology literature, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, about having one authoritarian, narcissistic parent and one that is overly kind and supportive, and the dysfunctions of the ego that kind of cycle produces. But as my brothers and I matured, we grew out of our black and white thinking, our narcissism. And it took quite a number of years, but to say it had something to do with our mum would have to be a gross understatement. What happened was, just over 8 years ago, our mum's appendix burst. She had an operation to have it cleaned up and she was recovering in hospital. This was towards the end of my first year at university, and I remember talking to her on the phone from my shitty little room at the Paper Street Soap Company. I asked her if she was okay, and she told me that she was. I think it was the very next day, 8 years ago today, in fact, that she woke up at about 4:30 in the morning in her hospital bed and asked the nurse for a cup of tea. About an hour later, she suffered a massive brain aneurysm. A blood clot in her brain exploded and her heart stopped. The staff performed CPR on her for like an hour, eventually got her heart started and placed her on life support. My oldest brother called me that morning and said that I'd better get on the train and get up there because she might not make it. We were in this tiny waiting room most of the day as the hospital staff organised brain scans to assess the damage. And eventually a doctor came into the room and informed us that it had been a fatal event. Her brain had been starved of oxygen for too long and she'd suffered massive brain damage. She was dead. When the doctor gave us the news, the entire room reeled and I exploded in tears. After what must have been 10 minutes of sobbing, the piece of gum that was in my mouth had basically turned to liquid. I moved over to the bin and went to pick it from my mouth, but it was more like scooping a handful of slobber. It was probably a disgusting sight, but I was oblivious. I think it's fair to say that I took it the hardest out of most of the people in that room. When the funeral came around, Luke, my eldest brother, asked me to write something to say at her memorial. I had to refuse because I just couldn't imagine going through with it. In the 8 years since the day she died, though, I've said a great deal about her. She was a lovely woman, a good mother, and even though she hated being called mother. And she's inspired me on many occasions, inspired me to laugh, cry, and occasionally to write. I love you, Mum, and I'll always miss you.